it was just doing my head in. I was like, I know more than all of you sat around this table and no one is listening to me, and you're so disrespectful and you're paying me but you won't listen to me. I was like, I've had enough. I'm just going to go off and do my own project. And I was like, it is different as a woman. I can see the way that I'm being treated is different, and rather than getting annoyed about it, I'm going to do something positive about it.
You're listening to Not My First Guess. I'm Hattie Willis, your host, and each episode I talk to an entrepreneur, investor, or startup expert to unpack their hardest moments, biggest wins, and hard-earned advice so we can shortcut our learnings as founders together. Today I'm joined by Emmie Faust, serial entrepreneur, investor, advisor, mum of 4, and founder of Female Founders Rise. Emmie is an experienced exited entrepreneur with over 20 years in digital marketing, having personally scaled and sold not 1, not 2, but 3 businesses. She also has the rare and exceptional tale of facing modern-day dragons on Dragon's Den and winning, though her investment didn't come without battle scars. Last year, Emmie decided to take on a new adventure and set out on a mission to help other female founders succeed by creating Female Founders Rise, a community based in the UK of over 1,000 female and non-binary founders, providing advice, connection, resources, and the support they need to scale their businesses. It's quickly growing, and I'm very proud to be involved as an advisory member. In this episode, we discuss paying a painful price for SEO, learning how to listen to what the universe is telling you, navigating stressful exits, deciphering what to believe and who to trust as a founder, and balancing organic growth with global aspirations. So without further ado, let's get started. Emmie, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here, Hattie. I have listened to many of your podcasts and learnt a lot, so thank you for doing this as well.
And for those of you who don't know, Emmie actually has a playlist of podcasts, which is well worth going and checking out. If you like this kind of thing, you'll, I'm sure, love the other podcasts on there. They're all about championing female founders, which is totally aligned to what we do. So go and listen to that playlist. We'll put a link in the show notes because Emmie is a great champion of women.
Yeah.
And that is what we want to see more of.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I was thinking about doing a podcast, and I might at some point do a podcast. It's not totally written off. But then I listened to your podcast and I listened to lots of other podcasts, and I thought so many female founders, great female founders, have already been interviewed by other people and they've done a fantastic job. So I would just be redoing the work that someone else has already done. And it actually made more sense to me to bring all those podcasts together in one place. Also, because I just like listening to them. I love listening to all those podcasts. And I actually find it's also nice to mix it up a bit. So you're listening to different hosts and different podcast themes and ideas, I suppose. So it was like something that I just wanted. And then I thought, oh, I'll just make it accessible to everyone. So
love it. So, Emmie, though, let's start because we're going to circle back to your work to support other female founders. And I know that's a massive theme that we share. But I want to talk about your founding story first. So you've been founding, scaling, advising businesses since 2005. But how did you first become a founder? I read somewhere that you have been super independent since like 14, first job, first income, moved to London with £100.
You done research.
Oh, well, full credit to our brilliant researcher. But it seems like it's a thread for you, this like independence and wanting to build your own path. Was founding always an inevitability for you? How did you get into it? Tell us a bit more about that.
It's interesting that you asked that question because now I've done the work on Female Founders Rise, this new project, and the purpose and the mission and the vision. And for me, it's about financial freedom and the financial freedom that female entrepreneurship can bring. And it's interesting what you were just saying, because the first job when I was 14 was about me having money, because at that point, even though my dad was a doctor and he was making relatively good money, he wanted to privately educate us all. And so actually we didn't ever have any disposable cash. We were like really hard up. And I always remember mum and dad talking about money and the fact that we didn't have enough. And it was always in the back of my head that, like, yes, he made those decisions to educate us and put all his money there. But for me, I suppose as a child, I could hear that that it was a bit of a struggle. And so we didn't have, we weren't given loads of money when we were growing up, and we were really encouraged to work. And I think that first job on a Sunday, I did 6 hours and I got 20 quid, which at the time was quite a lot of money. That gave me financial freedom. And then I worked all through uni. I worked in my gap years. And I think, working for other people, I saw one of my first like proper jobs. The woman that employed us, she was amazing. She was this amazing female founder, incredibly successful, treated us so well. She was incredible. And I just remember thinking like, she was a real inspiration to me. And then did a few sort of jobs, didn't really enjoy them. And then I never thought, oh, I want to have my own business. I mean, I think actually when I was working for this female founder who was really inspiring, I think I said to her, oh, I want to do something like you. I think I pretty much told her I wanted to set up a business like hers. And she was probably thinking, don't do that. But I think it just came. It was just seen to be one of those things where actually what happened was the guy that I then ended up setting a business up with, we were both at an awards dinner. Like they still do them, don't they? Awards dinners. And we were both working in the gambling industry at the time. And this was like 20 years ago. So it was right at the start when like online bingo and online sports betting and online poker was like taking off. And I'd fallen into that industry out of university because you're not very fussy, are you? You just take whatever job you're given. And one of my friends was doing that, and actually he was having an amazing time. He was traveling around the world, going to all these conferences. He got me into the industry, and then I sat next to this guy who ran an agency. And not ran an agency, he worked in an agency, and he was helping us with some of our marketing. And he'd invited me to this awards dinner, and we'd had a few drinks, and I didn't really know him, but we basically decided at that dinner that we were going to set up a business together, because it turned out we'd both been for an interview with this betting company in Cyprus, I think it was. And they said that they were going to spend £1 million or £2 million on marketing. And between us, we realized we'd both gone for the same interview. And then we also realized that if we ran it through an agency, we'd make 15% margin, because that's standard, which is given to you by the publishers, not by the company. So we decided we'd go back to this company that we were both interviewing for and say, don't worry, we don't want the job. You don't have to pay us a salary, but we'll take that couple of £1 million and we'll buy the media for you, and it won't cost you anything, but we'll make the money off the commissions, which would have made us like 300 grand or something. So basically that we decided that night, pretty much set it up 2 days later. Ed, my business partner, he was already working in that space in an agency. He had loads of contacts with William Hill, and we had clients from like day one, and they all prepaid us. So the nature of the gambling industry at that time was quite risky and untrusted. So it was very standard that every single client prepaid us for the whole life of our agency.
Amazing. And this then became a serial co-founder, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we set that up. That was a media agency. I think before I met Ed, I'd been playing around with this online comparison site for bingo and poker and sports betting. And I then applied to Dragon's Den just for a laugh, because I love Dragon's Den, and this was 20 years ago when it wasn't quite so sensationalized. And I was like, is this actually real? Like, how do they find the people? Does it actually happen? So it was almost me like being curious and thinking, I love this program. So I just applied on a bit of a whim. And I remember it said, like, how much money do you want? So I said 200 grand. And it said, how much of your business do you want to give away? I said 10%. So it said, what are you valuing your business at? So I was like, 200 times 10, 2 million. We'd never made any money. It was only going for about 5 months. We didn't employ anyone. I'd never done a business plan, like literally nothing. I just totally made it up to do the application. And then we got a call from Dragon's Den to say, can you come in and meet us? It's a bit like, oh shit, you haven't actually got a viable business. It was very, very, very early stage, ticking over, but not making any money. Maybe it was generating some revenue, but it wasn't making any profit. So we went in, had a chat with them. My business partner wasn't up for this at all because it wasn't his idea anyway. And he thought it'd be a distraction to the media agency, but I dragged him along. They then said, oh no, we're not going to do this because it's gambling. And I said, okay, that's fine. But you do realize that everyone's 70-80% of the UK population are playing the national lottery, and, loads of people are going to the bingo and spending £5 a week. So then they changed their mind, and I think they realized actually it is quite mainstream. Yes, like many things, if you abuse it, it's bad, but loads of people are betting on the horses or betting on the football or whatever. And so they brought us back. Finally, we got accepted on, and then we were like, we've actually got to do the numbers to get ourselves this £2 million valuation, and we haven't ever made any money. So basically I managed to create, I don't know how I did it, but like, I love maths and I did economics, accounting and law at uni, but I managed to like back flip the model to show that what we'd done to date, the customers that we'd acquired for this business, and that the money that we'd made and then the lifetime value of those showed, I don't know, a customer lifetime value, say like £500 or £200 or whatever it was. Anyway, I managed to get all the figures to go to create a business that was worth, I don't know, whatever it was, to value the business at 2 million. And it was really complicated equations, and there was different cost per acquisitions and different customer lifetime values for all the different offerings, whether it was like bingo, sports betting, poker. And I just remember like flipping the board over in Dragon's Den, and I said, "Do you want to know how I got to that figure?" And they were like, "Yes." And then I did this like really like full on equation. It was like, "This is what we've got so far. We've made £6,000 from this many customers. It's cost us this much to acquire them." And did this whole like you and I understand the importance of the cost per acquisition, the cost to acquire a customer, and the customer lifetime value. Loads of people at that point, to 20 years ago, I mean, I've been into big businesses where they don't understand that, but that real basic sort of knowledge. And so I managed to show them that from the data and the traction we got to date, that actually this was very, very doable. Obviously, it's a complete made up figure. But the interesting thing is that actually one of our friends who set something up at exactly the same time, doing exactly the same thing, sold it for 10 million. So it wasn't a total, even though I made it up, totally made it up. I didn't even know how to value a business. I didn't know anything that I know now. So yeah, it was really interesting. And I think one of the reasons they invested in us is because we were already running a media agency, which had been really successful. And we'd made like 200 grand profit in a year as a startup. And they were like, wow, well, if you've got that covered, you're very believable. And obviously we knew our industry really well. It was I suppose it was a massively growing sector. So if you think about what's attractive actually to investors, it was like, we've got the domain experience, we're already running a successful business, and this is a really growing market.
So much in there to unpack. Let's start with the basic question that I know everyone's going to have. What is it actually like being on Dragon's Den? What is the process? What are some of the kind of behind the scenes that you might not expect?
That's why I wanted to do it, because just to see if it was all real and how it all works. So basically, the actual process was a bit painful in terms of my business partner really didn't want to do this. He didn't want to go on TV. I was a bit like, whatever, it's fine. He was slightly kicking his heels, and I'd also done all of the sort of the financy numbers bit. So I think he felt a bit like, I don't want to be here. So anyway, we arrived at 7 o'clock in the morning or something, and they put you in a green room all day, basically waiting to see the dragons. Now, luckily, we were the last people of the day. And the reason why that was lucky is because I spent all day fiddling with those numbers in the green room before we were going to go on, and all day tweaking it. And also, not only do I have to work out the numbers for the valuation, but also all the, net profit, gross profit, blah, 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 and remind myself. And like, I'd only basically knocked it all together probably the night before. And so I was trying to memorize all these numbers. And so I basically remember just sitting in the green room and working through all of those things. It was such a blessing, because if we'd gone on first thing, I wouldn't have known those numbers. As it was, I just rattled everything off. And I think actually when it's really fresh in your memory, it's much easier to do. So that was really actually really annoying for my business partner, that we were having to hang around all day in this green room. I remember him being annoyed, but it was actually brilliant for me. And then I remember them taking us on their little buggy into the studio, and the producer said, "You've got this, you know so much more than they do about your industry. They don't know anything about gambling, the gaming industry, and you've been doing it for ages." So she was just like, "You've got this, you're going to be fine." It was incredibly hot in there. My poor business partner, he was sweating like absolute mad. I mean, we're only 25, but it was just so hot, and the lights on you. And I remember he had to sort of ask for a towel like halfway through. But I think they want you to sweat, don't they? I think they want you to they want that, And I remember actually, so Deborah, what's his name, Peter, they were all really nice. They said, "Look, you're obviously running successful businesses already. We're really impressed by you." But I don't think anyone else probably wanted to put their name to something that was in the gambling space. But Theo did. And I don't know, he said, "I've got an idea of something." And I don't know if he was doing it because at the time he had Ryman's and he really wanted to understand digital and work with the gambling and gaming industry and the porn industry at the time. They were like the most forward thinking industries in terms of digital and how everything works. And so actually he was like, "I can learn a lot from you." We did actually help him quite a lot. We hired him a really good digital growth person for Ryman. So I don't know why he invested.
Again, so much to dive into. So obviously now you do a huge amount to support female founders to get investment. And I think often if you're a first-time founder and you're coming into the investment space, like all you might have seen is things like Dragon's Den or Apprentice. What do you think is and should be different in real life to how it works on some of those shows? So, in terms of both maybe the ask, so what you give away in terms of equity versus what your valuation is, and also, I guess, what you're looking to get from that angel. Because I think sometimes Dragon's Den can be a really helpful way for people to understand angel investing.
I would say, I mean, one of the best things for Dragon's Den for many people is the PR. And interestingly, they really didn't talk about our product or that we were offering, because obviously it was in the gambling space and they probably didn't want to be seen to be promoting that. But for many people, going on Dragon's Den can be a total game changer because they're getting all that PR and the backlinks, people linking to their website, which is great for SEO. And I think now, even more so, there's even more excitement around Dragon's Den. So I think the PR is really good. I think the Dragons obviously take a huge amount. Also, there's just a whole mix, isn't there? They basically get businesses that are totally uninvestable almost for laugh, to like laugh at them, which I don't like at all. I think that's really horrible to get people on for entertainment who aren't actually investable in. And then the ones that are, they take such a huge chunk that it feels like, yeah, it feels like it's a bit of a piss take. If you've got a product-based business, to have some of those dragons who can open the door to you, it's going to take your business from probably potentially nothing if you try to do it on your own, because it's so competitive and there's so many other people doing it, to, they've got the network. And I think one of the things that's so important, I say all the time, with running your business, it's about the relationships and the network, isn't it? And those people that can open doors, and they basically can open loads of doors. So you might get a really bad valuation and they'll totally take the piss and get a brilliant deal, but actually they are probably bringing value to the business. I think with Theo, he wasn't really bringing, to be fair, any value to the business apart from the money, because we were teaching him about digital. He didn't understand digital at all. We were at the forefront of what we were doing. And so no one was going to know what we did or be able to help us with that very specific business. So there wasn't anyone on the panel, I don't think, that was a good fit in terms of strategic help and advice.
I think there's a good reminder there for those who are thinking about getting angel investment to think about who you want strategically and what they can lend you that you're missing, and whether that's access into an industry or whether that's skill sets that they have themselves. I think it's something that can be easy to do, and it's where I see a lot of founders go wrong, is that they just reach out to anyone with angel in their title.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think I'm not angel investing at the moment, but I've done 17 so far since last summer, and anything between 2 and 11K. And every time I get an investor update like I did today, I will always try from that and do one thing. So, like, give a Google review, give a recommendation, introduce them to someone they need to be introduced to, create a LinkedIn post to promote them, or do something. And also we'll try and help them with their marketing, or they're in my mind. So, like, I actually know that as an angel investor, I would say the money is probably a half or less than a half of the value that I'm going to bring. The real value is that if I invest in it, or I'll actually care about them, and I'll take a call. And you probably do, I get asked all day every day for help and advice, and I can't do that to everyone, but I can do that to the people that I've invested in. I can hold their hand a bit and say, look, I've been there. And a lot of them have got me on WhatsApp, and they're really respectful, actually. I wouldn't mind if they reached out more, but I think hopefully they do know that I'm there for them if they need me.
And I want to come back to your perspective as an angel, because I think it's always really helpful to hear from someone who's sat on both sides. So, what founders maybe need to know about angel that they don't understand until they've sat on that side of the table. One other bit I just wanted to touch on in your dragon story is the financial modeling, because I feel like this is really overwhelming for first time founders. And I think what you said in there, which was really, I think is really reassuring, is around knowing the numbers that drive your business model. And actually, once you know those numbers, then you can tell stories to convince people to buy into you. But unless you've done the strategic thinking.
Yeah, so I knew the cost per acquisition, the customer lifetime value, the industry standards across all the different sort of product offerings. I could also see what we got, and I could explain why what we'd made to date, say a fifth of that, was because we'd only running the business for 2 or 3 months, and typically people would do X, Y, Z. And I suppose this is where you've got the domain expertise, because I had the domain expertise of working in online gambling, online marketing, digital marketing for like 3 years. And my other business was a digital media agency, and we were working with gambling clients. I had that very in-depth knowledge, whereas most founders, if they've got funding, whatever, and you ask them what their cost per acquisition is or what they're hoping to pay to acquire a customer, many of them just chuck anything into a spreadsheet and they don't actually know. I've had someone who said, I put £10 to acquire a customer into my model or whatever. I was like, but you're never going to get a customer for £10. Where did you get that from? Oh, well, we just put that in. And I know some people say, oh, just make it all up. So even though we did make the valuation up, it was actually off the back of real figures. And it's interesting that someone else doing something similar did sell for £10 million. I suppose if I tried to do that calculation and I'd never managed to get myself to a 2 million valuation, I'd have had to have turned around and said, actually, this isn't a viable business. But yeah, I think it's like having that understanding and that clarity, and it's sometimes it's quite hard to get that, but it's not that hard because you can go and speak to media agencies, you can go and speak to marketing agencies, you can go and pay an advisor who works in that space, and a lot of things just by talking to people who are already doing stuff in a similar space.
Yeah, such good advice. And I think people get afraid to go and ask those questions and get rejected. And if you do, that's fine. The other reason I wanted to touch on the Dragon's Den piece is I know you said that for a while you didn't talk about it because it actually felt like a failure and you didn't want to talk about the failure side. And I know you've massively then into that. And there's a huge thread for me in why I started this show was to try and shine a light on people's failures so we can all learn from them together and all shortcut our journeys. So would love to know how that failure felt at the time, and then looking back how that's changed after other successes. And I think we get this beautiful distance allows us to be very reflective, but I think it's helpful to remember how it felt.
I think it's really changed. Like people celebrate failure now, whereas before people didn't celebrate failure. So it's almost you need to fail to succeed. So if you haven't failed, then whatever. Whereas at the time, that wasn't celebrated. And also, I think, and there was someone else who's been on Dragon's Den who was saying something about getting trolled. But it's basically if you go on Dragon's Den, you put your head above the parapet, you're basically saying, "Look at me, I'm on Dragon's Den." And then people want you to fail. Like our competitors wanted us to fail. They didn't like the fact that we were getting PR and coverage and that we were going to potentially do better than them, especially in the gambling industry, which is like, totally not about collaboration, but about competition. So failing at the time, it obviously felt, yeah, it felt embarrassing. It felt bad. I think because we put our head above the parapet, and then that's all anyone would say to me. Oh, you went on Dragon's Den. How's it going? How's your business going? It'd be like, oh, it's not going anymore. Oh, why is it not going? And it's like that whole conversation that was a bit like, even 10 years later, people are still saying, oh, Emmie, I remember seeing you on Dragon's Den. So I really just tried to sweep that under the carpet. And actually, probably, I'm sure if you run a business and you put your heart and soul into it and it fails, it must be very upsetting. I was never like, it was all basically a bit of a laugh going on Dragon's Den. And then we got this money and then we're like, oh God, we need to do this. We're actually running another successful business at the same time. So I think if the successful business had failed, that would have been a real kick in the teeth. But this was a bit like a little side project. There was a bit of fun. Oh, that didn't go to plan. Oh dear, but it doesn't matter because we were making really good money and having a good time with the other one. I think the main bit was just that conversation that everyone wants to know about Dragon's Den. And you basically have to just say, no, that didn't work out. So yeah, that's why I sort of like to keep it hidden away. But obviously then I've actually realized it's a string to my bow. I mean, not that many people have been on Dragon's Den and got funding. I must have been one of the first women on there. We got the biggest single investment ever at the time because we got £200,000 off one dragon, which is also quite impressive actually, looking back on it, especially when we didn't even have a business plan or like we weren't making any money. And I learned a lot actually. And the reason it failed, one of the reasons, was we were focusing a lot of our energy and budget on SEO, search engine optimization. So this was in the days before like Facebook ads or anything like that. And so in the sort of gambling space, there was lots of what we call affiliates or partners who used to drive traffic to your website. And so we were like a master affiliate. We were driving lots of different traffic to lots of different operator sites because we were a comparison site. But we also needed to get our own traffic. And to do that, we were doing various things to get our rankings high in the search engine optimization. This was before paid ads. You couldn't also do paid ads for gambling on Google either initially. So pretty much everyone's traffic was just coming through SEO. And we used one of the best agencies that we had heard about. It was a guy that talked at a search engine conference and he was the lead speaker. So I was like, this guy must be the best. We got him on board and basically with SEO, there's like black hat, which is like the dodgy stuff. There's the grey, whatever, grey, which is a bit on the edge. And everyone in the gambling space was doing black hat SEO. They were all, it's like all a bit under the radar. They were all doing loads of stuff, which wasn't illegal. It just, in Google's eyes, they didn't like him. And we didn't understand SEO, which is why we hired this agency. And obviously, they were doing lots of the stuff that Google didn't like. And we, either Google found us out or one of our competitors reported us, and we lost everything. We lost all of our rankings. We went from like number 1 to number 50 overnight, and that just pulled the plug on all of our revenue. And we had teams to pay, and the agency said, don't worry, it's fine, just let's redirect everything to new domain names and it will all be fine. So we did all that, and they kept saying, don't worry, it's going to recover, we've done this loads of times, we know it'll be fine. 2 months in, it didn't recover. So basically, there was a big mess up. And I think what I learned from that was be very careful about SEO agencies. That was one thing, because it's a very dark art. It's not a dark art, but to most founders it is. And also just to really have an understanding of, if you are giving the sort of, basically we're giving the future of our business over to an agency, and we don't really 100% understand what they're doing or the implications that they could trash our whole business overnight by like one or two small things that they did. And we weren't aware of that. And I think the other thing is, obviously, we were massively reliant on one channel, which was SEO. We wouldn't have done that now, because you can have multiple channels: paid ads, organic, social, LinkedIn, Twitter. But at the time, there wasn't really that many other channels. It was basically creating content. And yeah, I mean, I've actually had a client who has had something similar with an SEO agency, and I really desperately tried to explain to them what had happened to us. Unfortunately, they didn't listen, and they had a very similar situation. It's a real lesson. And yeah, I'm not working with that client anymore, because basically, like, if I give advice and you don't want to listen and then something really bad happens, that for me is, I don't know, it's not a great relationship with a client. But actually, what I feel like is I learned from it, and I was able to take those learnings forward. Unfortunately, people didn't listen to them. But essentially, if anyone's listening to this podcast, SEO is like, it's something that people really charge way too much for. Many agencies are doing barely anything if you actually look at what they're doing. And most of SEO you can do yourself. If you understand what you're doing, you can set yourself up for success, and you don't probably need to be paying agencies a lot of money to be doing it. And it's also a long-term thing. So it's not something that's going to turn on the results tomorrow.
Absolutely. And I think there's just a broader lesson as well, on to your point of, if you're outsourcing something that is so core to your business model, where you don't know what's happening, you don't control it, there is just that outsized risk that you fail for the reasons that were not your execution.
But you know what? Obviously, it would be nice to sell a business for 10 million, but actually, would I have wanted to sell a gambling business for 10 million? Would I have wanted to have worked in the gambling industry? I mean, I really didn't enjoy the gambling industry, and it was quite interesting, because one of the things, I was doing a course, I think yesterday, and it was all about angel investing and how to pick a good business to invest in. It was all talking about like the passion of the founders, and have they got a real story, and have they got an affinity with this? Because when it gets tough, you want them to stick with it. So with Female Founders Rise, I've got an affinity, I've got a passion. I love it. Like this morning, I ran an event. I don't think it even made any money for me, but I don't care. I'm just going because I love doing it. Whereas with the gambling stuff, I didn't love it. And probably that was the universe saying, get out of the gambling industry. But yeah, I mean, I didn't have that passion or love for it. So it was like, I don't have any problems. I don't have any, that was just what it was. And we had some money left in the business, and we gave it back to Theo, and he gave it to his charitable trust. So it all ended on a good note.
And then for you, you've got one successful business. So where do you go from there?
I was going to say there's a huge amount between that, which was probably when I was 26, and when I started angel investing, which was like last year when I was 43. So in between all that, let's just do a whistle stop tour. Ed and I running a successful media agency. Whenever we had a good idea, we would spawn a little new project on the side, put 10K into it. If it was looking like it would go into something, that would become a company, and then we would run it. And out of that, we ran another 2 really successful companies, which ended up being more successful than the media agency. It was almost like we had a little experimentation bed, probably sort of like an incubator thing, where we had, we were being paid, so this didn't need to pay us. We had team of people who had like bits of time on their hands. We had just everything set up. So it was like super easy just to be like, oh, should we test that out? Yeah, that looks good. So we went on to have quite a few businesses together, me and Ed. And then the two main ones, at one point we were like, it didn't make sense to have the media agency, and we had a business that was an agency working across the programmatic advertising, which was similar, and we wanted to set up as a separate business because we wanted to be able to sell to other agencies, which we couldn't if it was Jack Media, our agency. But it got quite confusing for the staff and for me and Ed, because we were running these two businesses and people were like, I don't know who to speak to about which one. I went on maternity leave, so I took the media agency. We were already partnering with a TV agency who wanted to buy us. So I looked after that as we were selling it. And we sold that for an okay amount of money. But actually, that was the sort of bread and butter that drove all the innovation and paid us really good dividends and paid our salaries. And that was the constant that kept all the wheels turning. And then it was the other businesses that we exited for more money. Ed took the programmatic agency and he carried on working there, which is what he wanted to do for about 2 or 3 years. And then we sold that to a bigger independent. And then another business, we just made loads of money in a year and liquidated the company and closed it down and paid a lot of tax. And then I did some consultancy. I did a short stint at Google for 6 weeks, which didn't work out because I didn't ever see my children. And I sold a business while I was there. So I didn't need to be working in a company that wasn't a good fit. Did about 8 years consultancy and then fell out of love with that when I got ill. And so in the summer, I decided to quit consultancy, sold my house in Wales, which I'd bought when I sold my business, decided that with all the profits from that, which was about 70 or 80K, I'd invest all that in female founders and that I would focus on female founders rise, which was this idea that I'd always had to help women run successful businesses, find financial freedom through female entrepreneurship, and just be happy and enjoying their work.
So a couple of questions on the exit process, because obviously you've had a couple of exits. So how did you know when the time was right? How was that process for you personally? Was it an emotional one?
Desperate to get rid of them, so the media agency we'd both had enough of. My heart wasn't in it. I think pretty much from the day we set that up, we were always talking about selling it. And so we were really happy. I think we were looking for a buyer for that, which is different. So when you're looking for a buyer, you won't get as much because you're like looking. Whereas the other one, we were approached and we were much more attractive. So we got paid a lot more. So yeah, very happy to get rid of them. It was a bit weird though when I was doing the earn out because you have to go and stay there for 6 months. So it's almost like they want you there so that you're still involved, so that it keeps the old team happy and the old clients happy, but they don't actually want you doing anything because they don't want you to be building relationships with people. So I remember that being depressing, almost going into the office and doing nothing in my own business. I did sit on the board of directors for that business that bought us for quite a while and had some interesting conversations around digital, which I think they just saw me as a young woman, didn't really know what I was doing. I don't know why they thought that was ridiculous, but he would challenge me and say things like, Facebook is never going to be big. Anyway, when I went back 2 years later, my team, the digital team, the Facebook team, were billing more than anyone else in the agency. So I was like, there you go. Didn't say that to him though, because he was one of those sort of slightly arrogant old men. But anyway, so the other exit, just I basically moved on. I said to my business partner, you run that. I wasn't a director, but I obviously was a shareholder. And I just got a call one day when I was at Google and they said, we've been offered 7 million quid for this business. We're going to take it. And I was like, great, that sounds amazing. Thank you. So I think the only stressful bit with the selling, because we did sell the media agency to this guy, is as soon as your staff know you're selling, they get unsettled. They don't want to be bought necessarily. They feel like their jobs might be at risk. And so there's obviously all this sort of like unsettledness. And then you're like, are we actually going to be able to sell if everyone's leaving? Because actually they're sort of buying that knowledge. So there's quite a stressful process. I'm not up for like building some massive business again, because I remember just going on holiday and being stressed because people would leave or whatever.
Let's talk about the angel investing aspect. I'd really love to dig into, as an angel, were there things that you had to educate yourself on to flip from the founder side to the angel side that maybe weren't obvious? Or what different perspectives and different insight did switching sides of the table bring you?
So when I sold my business, someone helped me with something which meant that I ended up getting money that I was owed, that was my money, that I might not have otherwise got. Let's just put it that way. And the guy that helped me, I committed. He worked in VC, and he looked at a contract for me, which ended up saving me a lot of money. And so I committed to myself that I was going to put 50 grand into his fund. I didn't even know what a VC fund was. I don't think I literally was just like, so I gave him 50 grand. It was like, there you go, there's 50 grand. It was almost just like, thank you for helping me. So that was my first investment. But I think it was almost like, I didn't really know what I was doing. And my husband's always been the one that's more like into the sort of shares, and my dad, And maybe I did a few little investments on things like Crowdcube or Cedars, but I definitely wasn't aware of angel investing. And then I just remember reading all the stats about like women are hardly getting any funding. And I was just like, this is really annoying me. And I'm going to commit my money to women. If everyone committed half their money to women, great, but I will commit all my money. So I decided I was going to do that. But I literally didn't know what I was doing. I don't know what to look like for in a deck. I mean, I'd made it all up on Dragon's Den. I literally didn't have a clue. And I just like meet these women. I'd be like, oh, you're great. I want to invest in you. So I spotted this woman called Maya Mufalek, who is a marketing expert. And I also spotted like Dan from Heights, Dan Murray Serta. And I could see on LinkedIn that they were investing in like really good businesses. And I was like, oh, hang on a minute. Where are they finding these from? So anyway, I contacted Maya, and she was amazing. She's been really supportive, and she introduced me to Ventures Together. And Ventures Together is a collective of exited founders or Series B operators. So somehow I managed to sneak in, because I am an exited founder, but not as impressive as most of the people in there. But I think because I'm a female investor and I was investing in women, I got in, and that has been like a masterclass in investing. They're amazing. And through that, I've also become the women in there are all part of a group called Ladies Who Launch, which also has got other female investors who've joined. I think there's about 10 of us. So I'm part of that ecosystem. And then there's one other, which I've recently joined, which is another group of investors who are investing in underrepresented founders. So through all those groups who seem to have amazing deal flow and amazing knowledge, I basically am learning. I said to someone this morning, I think since I started angel investing and Female Founders Rise, I've probably got 5,000 new connections on LinkedIn and that I'm connected with. And I feel like I've done an MBA in entrepreneurship. It's like I have learned more in this last 8 months than I've learned in the last 8 years consulting.
And so, what have been some of the biggest reflections that might be useful? Particularly, I'm thinking for founders who are raising for the first time, don't really understand how angel investing even works, or what an angel might be looking for from them, what might excite them, what might worry them,
I
some of those
think, first
reflections.
of all, that angel investing in VC is very different. I think there's a big confusion. Everyone just lumps in investing into the same thing. So, like someone who invests in a crowdfunding campaign, a crowdfunding campaign could be like they could invest £10 or like £100. That's very different to an angel who's going to invest 5, 10, 15, 20K, even more. And then obviously VC is a whole different ballgame. I think I really like the angel collectives because they enable angels to diversify their risk. I've done 17 investments. I want to do 100. I want to do 200 investments of 2 grand over each year of my life. I'd love to do that. I'd love to have invested in 150, 200 businesses. And the collectives allow you to do that because it allows you to make small investments in multiple businesses because it's all bundled up into what they call an SPV, I believe.
It stands for special purpose vehicle. For anyone wanting to know, on the founder side, it's particularly useful because it means that even if you have more small ticket investors, they don't take up multiple lines on your cap table, which is essentially where you show your shareholders. So it stops it getting too muddy, and it means you have less stakeholders to personally manage as a founder because you tend to work with this special purpose vehicle. So they've become quite popular recently. So yeah, if you haven't heard of one, go and look them up.
And I've invested in a couple of founders actually recently who've done that. But the way that the collective works is so we see the opportunities and then we decide within that collective who wants to invest. And so it could be like 10 of us, 20 of us, 30 of us. And if everyone puts in a couple of grand, that could be 100, 150 grand. So I think the angel collectives are really interesting. And a lot of them have their own thesis. So they'll only invest in particular kinds of businesses. So Ventures Together is very much a tech focused group. But I think there's lots of different collectives. I think Gareth Hawkins, who came to one of our events, was saying I think there's 95 or something angel collectives in the UK. So there's loads. Probably should make a note of all of them for our founders. And I think that's really important because I think if you can get into a collective and you can get 10 angels that way, it's a lot quicker than reaching out to 10 angels directly. And also, I think with the angels, like, you never know if an angel's investing at the moment. Like, for example, I'm taking a pause right now. You don't know what their thesis is. You don't know what their check size is. None of that information is really publicly available. So you could do a huge amount of work reaching out to lots of people and you don't know if they're a good fit or they're a right fit. But I would say if you are reaching out to people, just make it super personalized. I don't even read the ones that are just like cut and paste. I got so many guys reaching out to me saying I want an investment, and it's I don't even invest in men, so you obviously know nothing about me, and I will only invest in people I've got a relationship with. You need to know, like, and trust someone before you buy from them, before you invest in them, before you do business with them. You're not going to just put investment into some random business that you don't know about. So I would say all of the women that I've invested in have either come through a collective. I can know, like, and trust them because someone else has recommended them who's part of the group and it's all been checked out, and or they've come through someone that has built a relationship with me over a while on LinkedIn or something like that.
And so there's one common mistake there around how the outreach is done and lack of personalization, which is a massive mistake founders make. You feel like you've got to reach out to everyone who says they're an angel investor, and then you can't personalize it because you're reaching out to such high volumes. But it's actually much smarter to reach out more, as you say, where you can be more targeted to people who are actually aligned and they're looking at businesses like yours or founders like you. What other mistakes do you see when you review startups? Like, what puts you off a startup business or worries you?
I mean, personally, I'd want some kind of traction. I wouldn't look at random decks because I'm not a sort of an expert. I would say that's not my area of expertise. So I'm either going into someone which I'm literally just investing off the back of a relationship. I think you're amazing. You sound great. I had a call with this woman, Simi, the other day, and she just blew me away. And every single question that was asked on the call, she followed up with those questions, with the answers. It's the minute I looked at her deck, she'd email me and said, I want you on my cap table because you've got relevant experience. It's like those kind of interactions.
Didn't happen to be Simi Lindgren
Yeah,
by
I
any
think it
chance.
is.
So Simi is amazing. If anyone wants to go and see how awesome she is, she's actually been on a previous episode of the podcast and on our episode specifically actually about fundraising as a diverse founder. She talks a ton about her experiences building UT. I think it's a fascinating business model. We're still planning to get her back on as a guest just to dive into UT in more detail and her personal journey because we had her on with some other guests. But yeah, a great example. It's one of the best episodes.
Yeah. I understand it's really hard for people to get in with angels, but I just do think it is about relationships. My investment is totally random. I've invested in a robotics company because I wanted to learn more about it. I have no interest in it whatsoever, but I want to learn more about it. I've invested in some businesses that I really understand that there's a need for. And I've invested in some businesses where I think the founder's amazing and I think that they're probably onto something.
And I think it's definitely what we've seen to my new company. If we raise, that's the assumption we're coming off, right? Which is that ultimately it's really hard to invest in someone unless you have that trust. And if you don't have a shorthand of knowing someone who can vouch for them or having enough in common very quickly that you can get that real kind of personal chemistry, then sometimes it's really hard to know who to back. So I think that's a really hard challenge for founders of how do you build that trust and get those relationships. And amazing that there are people like you who are trying very specifically to bridge some of these gaps where like female founders aren't getting funded right now, which just leads us on to Female Founders Rise. So let's talk about the mission behind Female Founders Rise, where that
It's
came
really interesting you
from.
say that because, a warm introduction is so important, isn't it? And there's all the stats that show that a warm introduction are way more likely to get a initial call and then get funded. So one of the things with Female Founders Rise is we want to get warm introductions, or we want to get introductions to networks of people that can open doors. And we just heard that from our February meetup, one of our founders got 180K in funding. I know, which is amazing as a
Amazing.
direct result of that meetup. So the idea that we're here to open doors, not necessarily to connect you with the investor that's going to invest in you tomorrow, but to connect you with people that care, that have access to those people and that can do introductions. That for me is the important bit because it's like your personal brand. People need to know, like, and trust you to buy from you. With any brand, it's your reputation, it's the recommendations, it's all those things, it's your passion, it's your authority, it's those things. And I think that's why networking and relationships are so important because it means a lot to get a warm introduction. And therefore, that's one of the things we're trying to do with Female Founders Rise. I've always really enjoyed working with women. And to be honest, there is a lot less ego. I've seen that. Yeah, there's some great guys I've worked with. I've got one client at the moment. I'll only work with one client, and he is the most respectful, lovely guy ever, Bill. But basically, generally, there's quite a lot of ego. I see it with a lot of the startups who I work with. The guys, they would like, I don't know, they like get on discovery calls and just totally take the piss and want free advice. And it just be like, I don't know, there's something about it. There's just, this isn't a good fit. Whereas I feel like for me, a lot of the women were like way more respectful. I could really empathize with them. I could really understand their journey. So I always enjoyed working with female founders, but almost felt like I shouldn't define who I want to work with by their sex. Like, what an awful thing to say. I'll only work with you because you're a woman and I won't work with you because you're a man. And so that was always playing in the back of my head. But like, I always thought, wouldn't it be great if there was like a go-to resource for female founders where you could just go and you could meet other people and you could check out the podcast and there'd be curated resources of like people you could really trust, because there's so much crap and there's so much great stuff. But like, as a founder, how do you know what to believe and what to trust? And there's hundreds of accelerators and most of them are great, but there's also quite a few shit ones. And so the idea of Female Founders Rise, it's like the go-to destination. And I kept putting it off because I was ill and because I was doing my consultancy. And then I think basically what happened with the consultancy that really pushed me over the edge, because there was a real, let's call them a head person in the client who was really just difficult, and also a board of white male old directors who weren't listening to me. And at one point it was just doing my head in. I was like, I know more than all of you sat around this table and no one is listening to me. And you're so disrespectful and you're paying me, but you won't listen to me. I was like, I've had enough. I'm just going to go off and do my own project. It is different as a woman. I can see the way that I'm being treated is different. And rather than getting annoyed about it, I'm going to do something positive about it. And at the same time, it was all those ongoing articles about 2% of female founders are getting funded and I could see everyone getting upset, and I was getting upset, and everyone's getting annoyed. Like, why is this? And people were saying, why is this? And there's no one really explaining why it was. It's all just a bit, VCs don't want to talk about it. Lots of people don't want to talk about it. It feels like maybe we're having those conversations a lot more, but it also felt like no one was actually doing anything about it. And now that I have really dug down deep, there are lots of people doing things about it, but sort of in the background, it didn't feel like there was the one focal point of people like saying, we're going to sort this shit out. And naively, I thought like, oh, I thought there was actually a solution. I just thought it's obviously like not enough female founders are getting in front of VCs. And I thought, if I can get a job at Google, or if I can do this, I can do this. So I went off on my merry way, slightly spurred on by these guys that had been rude and disrespectful and not listened to me. And I just thought, well, there's a need for Female Founders Rise. And we as female founders have very different challenges. And I'm going to just commit to doing that. And then it just totally took off.
And I think it's been really interesting to watch. And I think you wrote a post about this the other day, but it simultaneously has got huge popularity very quickly. There's clearly a need in the market. But I think you spoke about, in some ways, having to feel like it's growing slower than you want it to because there's so much passion there. And I think it spoke to something that I'd heard from Lottie on her episode, talking about growing the Copy Club community, and actually in some ways having to grow slower when you're growing a membership community, because you really do have to just focus on like building for the members and building with the members and not adding every functionality straight away, but taking your time with it and taking your time getting to revenue. And I think it's tricky, and just love your opinion on some of the lessons of growing a community, because that's what Female Founders Rise seems like its heart is.
It is community. So today we had a meetup, which was amazing. And every time I do something like that, I'm like, this is why I'm doing it, because I get inundated with my messages afterwards. Everyone's like, this is one of the best events I've been to. Thanks so much for doing a product focused one. There's always such great feedback, and I love that. And I think for me, I haven't done any paid advertising around female founders. So it's all grown organically from my personal brand and from LinkedIn. Would I get funding? I don't know, because a bit like Lottie, she alluded to it on the podcast, like she had a burnout breakdown, and like I did as well last year, and that's from overdoing it. And so the thought of it getting too big, I'm instantly like, I can't do this. So I say to my advisory board, oh my God, it's too much. I don't want to get funding. One side of me is like, Female Founders Rise is going to be the global go-to destination for female founders. I know that. I knew that when the minute I set it up, it was like, that's what it is. But right now it's not the global one, it's the UK one, or it will become the UK one. So I've got these massive sort of ambitions and aspirations about what I want it to be, but then I'm also like really holding myself back because I'm like, I can't let myself get into a mental state like that again. And that's just is the end. It's like, boom, you can't do anything. So you don't have anything. I mean, you have to cancel everything. So I'm very aware of that. I'm also very aware of running it like it is going to be monetized. It is going to make money. It's going to be very successful. But right now, I don't need to monetize it right now. Or for the first 8, 10 months, I don't need to monetize it because I wanted to just get an audience and get a community and find out what do they want? What do they need? What's important to them? Is it about meeting in person? Is it about pitch deck reviews? Is it about getting introductions to investors? Is it about supporting each other and having friends that are going through what you're going through? Is it about marketing? Is it about growth? What is it about? I don't know. Even though I'm a female founder, we have to do the research and we have to speak to them. And that's what I've been doing is the reason I love doing these in-person events is you get to speak to them all, their challenges, their problems, what they're enjoying, what they want. And then I do lots of surveys and I've done calls with them. For me, it's about finding what is it that's missing, what is unique about Female Founders Rise, what is needed, and actually creating something that people want and need, not what I think they want and need.
So powerful. I do want to touch on, and I know you've talked about it, and we'll share some links to some other podcasts you've been on in the show notes. We'll also obviously share links to follow Emmie on LinkedIn and check out what's happening with Female Founders Rise. Really recommend it. I've been to one of their events. They're brilliant. But I do want to touch on your burnout. And it's something that I'm increasingly aware has, the more founders I interview, how many it's happened to, where there's been this total burnout process and everyone's journey to it is very different. But I'd love to hear about your journey and whether there were, in hindsight, things that you would be able to advise other founders to think about earlier, or was it for you
The
inevitable?
weird thing is, when I was running my business, the successful businesses, I was never like stressed. I think, I was going into the office, I'd leave my computer in the office, I'd come home, I had my business partner, we had a team of people. It was easy. I was really young, going out loads, getting drunk, going into work with a hangover, and then having babies and not sleeping. But all of that was hard. But I was like young and I was just like, it all felt really easy. And yeah, fine, we were selling our company at points that was stressful. But I think for me, it was the pandemic, which was like with 4 kids, insane. My husband lost his job and he had an accident. He actually had an accident in the skate park, but it was like a really horrible accident, which totally messed his whole leg up. And he was like unable to walk, help, was waiting 2 weeks for an operation. And this toll on me worrying about him and then him not being able to help with anything with 4 kids was huge. And the pandemic, it was like trying to keep clients, and a lot of my clients were struggling, so I had the mental load of them. Then I decided to move my whole family to Wales. That didn't work out. I decided to move them all back again. I think I worked out I had something like 14 school places I had to apply for in the space of a year and a half. So actually the burnout breakdown, that didn't happen when I was really successful in running loads of businesses. That actually happened last year and the year before. And I think it was massively precipitated by long COVID. So I've since had basically, what's it called? Chronic fatigue. So long COVID and chronic fatigue, I think, are quite similar. Just so many weird things happened to me. It also sent all of my hormones totally out of whack. I had to start on HRT, I was only 43, so I was quite young, and I'd never had anything hormonally wrong with me before. So this all just came out of the blue, and lots of physical symptoms as well. And then finally, after about a year and probably 3 months or something, I saw a doctor who said, I think it might be long COVID. And we tried lots of things and we realized that stress was a massive factor in making the symptoms worse. And so that's when I started on anti-anxiety meds, got a therapist, and quit all my consultancy. And that's also when I went on my first solo trip, which I've done many since, to Tenerife. That was last September. And that's when I decided I was going to invest in women. I was going to do Female Founders Rise. And I was never going to go back to doing that work that I was doing before.
Wow. So we're running out of time. So much as there's still so much I want to dive into, I should be disciplined and wrap us up. 2 final questions I ask every guest. The first is, what is your proudest moment as a founder? And I know you've got lots of businesses to choose from, so you can
I'd
pick
say
any.
probably my proudest moment is setting up Female Founders Rise and really listening to my gut and seeing that come off just very quickly in the depths of this bad situation with the long COVID and the stress and the illness. I had this session with a woman in Bali, and it was called Soul Guidance. And I didn't know what it was. It was one of my clients who'd given it to me. And it was supposedly my soul talking to me. And I didn't know what to expect. And I just lay down on the floor, and she started saying these things, which was like, you're not going to be doing what you're doing anymore. You're not going to be working with the kind of clients you've been working with. You're going to be exclusively working with women. You're going to be helping women, not just with the business stuff like you've done before, but it's going to be holistic. It's going to come from your heart, and you're going to share all your experiences. You're going to share everything that's happened in your life, being a mum of four, all the amazing things you've done, but all the struggles that you've had. And she said, you're going to have a massive group of women, and it's going to be amazing. And you're going to be doing stuff for free. You're also going to be doing, on a smaller scale, paid things. And she said, you're going to be speaking on massive stages, and you're going to have big corporates paying you a lot of money, and you're going to make huge change. I was literally like crying there on the floor thinking, this is my ideal situation. This is what I'd love to do. And I was doing something totally different. So, a year and a half ago, I was consulting for guys. And it was like, oh my God. And I literally remember crying, thinking, this is my ideal life. And it was when I just moved back to London from Wales. And so I carried on, and I was worried about the kids as well, whether they were going to settle in. And she said, that's all going to be fine. Maybe that was then in the back of my mind. But since then, everything has come to that almost. It's all growing. She was like, it's just all going to happen. And in November, December last year, I found that recording and I listened back to it. It was a year later. It was almost a year to the day. And I thought, I'm going to listen to that recording and see what she said. And honestly, it was like exactly everything that's happening. It is.
Spooky.
Because also I just didn't know when I went for the session, I didn't even know what soul guidance was. I didn't know she was talking to my soul. So that's what my soul wanted, and that's what it's getting. So it's happy.
We love a happy soul. And it may be from the same session, but final question. What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
There's two bits I'm going to do really quickly. My dad, when I was quite young, gave me a talk on finance. He always talks about it. I don't remember it, but it obviously was something along the lines of don't get in debt, make sure you're always working and you generate more money than you spend. And I think that's probably given me the sort of get up and go, and maybe like the understanding about money, because I think we don't talk about money enough, especially not with women and girls. And then the other bit would just be watching that first boss, how she treated her team, how she treated her staff, how she was amazing, and just seeing that's what you do, that's how you look after people. And she was amazing to us, and I've taken a lot from what she did. And even like with my nannies and stuff like that, it's like they are still my team. I treat them, I make sure that I look after them so well, and I learned all that from her.
And was there anything specific about that style of leadership that you saw?
She was just so generous. She used to take us out to amazing, cool restaurants, and she'd always put us up in amazing hotels when we were working for her. Whereas like then when I went to work for Google, I got put in some really grotty, I don't know, 4-star hotel or something like that. It was just like the difference isn't like the big corporates and you have to stay in these allocated hotels. And, with her, it was almost like when we were away with work, she was also treating us like a really amazing hotel. And I really valued that. I think it was really nice, made it really special.
It's actually interesting. I met a founder last night who was talking about this and her startup ideas around like gifting at work and how actually like the small stuff makes.
I've remembered that for 20 years. She used to put us up in the Hotel du Vin, which at the time, 20 years ago, was like the best hotel ever. And we'd have these amazing big hotels with like bathtubs in our room and stuff. And like as a 22-year-old or 23-year-old, you're like, this is bonkers, staying in these incredible places.
Amazing. Well, Emmie, thank you so much for sharing so candidly and so much. And definitely everyone listening, go find out how you can support Female Founders Rise. I think one of the misconceptions that Emmie has talked about on her LinkedIn before is you don't have to be a woman to support it. There's a huge place for allyship in this as well. And I've been to the events and there've been incredible men who've been supporting and investing in women there. Please do get involved.
That'll be amazing.
If you're listening.
Thank you so much, Hattie.
Thanks for coming on. That's it for this episode. It's been a pleasure recording it for you, and we hope you love it. If you do, please do take a moment to give us a few stars or 5 on your podcast app of choice, so lots of other founders can find us too. And for those of you curious what I get up to when not interviewing founders for this show, I have a new startup, If We Raise, aiming to get expertise and capital to underrepresented founders earlier. You can follow what my co-founder Tim and I are up to via @IfWeRaiseTogether on Instagram or @IfWeRaise on LinkedIn and Twitter. We'll be sharing our lessons learned along the way, as well as highlighting the incredible founders and angel investors joining the If We Raise journey.